Hey team, in this video we're going to look at the Optimism quickstart project. Jumping into specific chains here, you can see we've got the Optimism quickstart section where we want to index all claim events from the Optimism airdrop contract. What is Optimism, you might ask? Well, jumping to the home page, you can see here that it's a low cost and a lightning fast Ethereum L2 blockchain or layer 2 blockchain powered by Optimism, and it's running on what's called OP mainnet. You can see here if it works on Ethereum, it'll work on OP mainnet at a fraction of the cost. The first step when creating a project is to check that we have the required prerequisites. Navigating to quickstart in the documentation site here, and then going to step 1, create a new project. You can see that we need Node, Docker, and the SubQuery CLI. Now let's do a quick system check in VS Code where I can run node-v, and if I've got Node installed, it will return a version, which here you can see is 20.3.1. If you don't see a version, it means you don't have Node installed, so do a quick Google search for Node and you can install it. Or if you're using brew on a Mac, you can run the command brew install node as well. After this, you'll need to install Docker, which you can again run via a Google search. And then the last step is to download the SubQuery command line. And you can do this by running npm or node package manager install -g for global subql CLI. Now, just a note that you need to have Node installed first before running npm, because when you install Node, the Node package manager gets installed along with it. Once this is installed, jump into VS Code and run subql-v to get the version, and you can see here I'm running version 3.5.1. Once you have all of these installed, you're now ready to start creating your first project. To create a project, we want to run the subql init command. We can then provide a name for the project, such as Optimism example, and then I'll be presented with a list of network families. Scrolling down, I can go and choose Optimism, select Optimism as the network, and then choose the starter project. What you'll see here on the left-hand side is a list of files and folders that are already pre-populated and created for me, just to help provide the framework or the scaffold of the project. Next, you can see I can provide my own RPC endpoint here. If I've got a custom one, I can type or paste it in. However, I can also hit enter to accept the default in yellow here. And what's interesting is that there are actually 5 endpoints provided as an array by default. And the way this works is that if one endpoint is not working, the project will cycle to the next one, which is a great feature that we've included to help improve endpoint reliability. I'll go ahead and accept the defaults here, and I'll do so for the remaining parameters. And you'll see an option for me to generate scaffolding from an existing contract ABI. Again, another feature where a lot of the code can be pre-generated if I link or point the project to an existing ABI file. What I'll do is I'll select no for now, and we'll follow the quick start guide. So now my project is ready to go. After we've initialized our project, we want to download all our project dependencies. So to do this, I want to change directory or CD into the project folder, and then I'll run the command yarn install. This will generally take about 30 seconds depending on your internet speed, so catch you after this is done. The first file we're interested in is the project.yaml file, otherwise known as the manifest file. And this can be viewed as the entry point to your project, defining most of the details of how SubQuery will index and transform the chain data. It also indicates where we're indexing data from and to what on-chain events we are subscribing to. So at the top here, we've got our spec version, which is typically 1.0. We've got the name of our project, what we gave it when we initialized it. And then we've got a description down here and a few other fields, which I'll explain shortly by the documentation. Down here, we are pointing to our schema.graphql file, which we'll talk about as well very shortly. And then in the network section, we've specified the chain ID and the various endpoints that you saw earlier. Now, all of these parameters don't have to be changed, but what we do need to update is the data sources section. So let's go and jump to our quick start. Scrolling down, you can see the data sources section here. Let's copy this. And I'm going to delete this and paste in the new one, save it. And what you can see is we're using the Ethereum runtime starting at block 9.2 million, because this is when the airdrop contract was deployed. So it's where we'll start getting data. We've got a contract address of the Optimism airdrop itself. So this is the smart contract. We're pointing to the airdrop API file, which defines how we can interact with the smart contract. We then have one handler here, which is effectively a function. It's called handle claim. And this gets triggered when the project encounters a match on our filter. The configuration here indicates that we'll be running a handle claim mapping function whenever a claimed topic filter is encountered on the Optimism network. And to get more information, let's check out the documentation again under the manifest file documentation. And it's here where you can understand the top level specs. We saw earlier the name, the version, the runner, etc. Then we can also jump into the data sources section where you can see the various other handlers and the supported filters as well. The second file of interest out of the three that we need to change is the schema file. The schema.graphql file here essentially determines the shape of the data that we want to extract from the blockchain. So let's go ahead and jump into the quick start again, and I'll copy out the example schema file and then we'll paste it into our code here, save it. And you can see here we've effectively got two entities. We've got claim and daily claim summary. These are effectively database tables and the fields within the entities representing the columns in our tables. The claims entity indexes the likes of transaction hash, account, value, and some block information, and also the daily claim summary. And you'll notice that the daily claim summary is of type daily claim summary, which is defined below here. This represents a one-to-one relationship where all claims have a claim summary. And this is also where the documentation comes in handy, because if I scroll down in our quick start to GraphQL schema, we've got a whole section on how to define the entities. In particular, they all need an ID field with type ID exclamation mark, meaning it's mandatory, to serve as the unique primary key. The supported scalar types are indicated below here. There are a few to choose from. And then there are entity relationships. So if you want to make your schema more complicated, you can create a one-to-one, one-to-many, or a many-to-many as well. So for further information, feel free to check out the documentation. The last file that we want to modify is called the mappings file, and you can find it in source mappings, and it's called mappinghandlers.ts. So let's first of all copy the contents from the quick start guide. Copy this across, and I'll just replace the existing code, save this, and then from the top you can see that we import some classes and types, and then we've got two functions called check get daily claim, and down here handle claim as well. Now the check get daily claim is really a helper function that checks if there is already an existing aggregation record, and it does some timestamp manipulation as well. The handle claim function here receives a log argument of type claimed log, and it's this argument that contains the blockchain data. We then log the block height or the number to the console for debugging purposes, provide some assertions as part of testing, and then extract the various blockchain data and store it in the various fields down below. And then we finally call save on our two objects, daily claim summary and new claim as well. And of course, not to forget, we do the aggregation down in this line here. To build our project, we first want to run yarn code gen. What this does is it uses the GraphQL schema and generates the associated TypeScripts, hence the outputs have a .ts extension. Now what you'll notice is that we've actually got an error saying that the airdrop ABI file doesn't exist. So we're going to have to go ahead and grab it, and we can do this by jumping into the manifest file. We'll copy out the smart contract address, and then we'll go into the Optimism Explorer here, and I'll copy the address in. And if I select the contracts tab and then scroll down, there should be an ABI section. Here we go, the contract ABI. So let's copy this out to clipboard, and then I'll jump back into the code. And then in the ABIS folder, I've got the ERC20 ABI. So let me select this and delete the contents, paste this in, and then I'll format this, save it, and I need to rename this as well. So let's call it airdrop instead of ERC20. Hit enter, and I'll run yarn code gen again. And there we have it, success. The next step is to go ahead and build the project by running yarn build. And what this does is it creates a distribution folder, performing things such as code optimization, preparing for a deployment. So that's successful. The last thing is to run yarn start docker, and this will start the Docker container. You can see here pulling down all the images and getting the nodes up and running. So what I'll do now is jump into the README file, and I'll scroll down and copy out the sample query here, and then let's jump into our playground, and I'll paste the query here and run it, and you can see we've got some data coming back. So what I can do is let's go ahead and do a cross check where I'm going to jump into the block explorer, and let's copy out the transaction hash, for instance. Here we go, we've got the transaction hash of a particular transaction, this one here. Let's do a quick comparison of the value. You should be able to see it's 179, and down here we've got 179 as well. So the values match. The decimal place is out by a little bit. However, if we look at the account, we've got 0xD2FA, which is 0xD2FA as well. And of course, the block height here, we've got 726. And scrolling up, we've got 726 as well. So the data matches, showing an index of all claim events from the Optimism airdrop contract.